You're in a place not outside of space or time, but somewhere very real, somewhere here on Earth. You've stepped in after hours to this collection of assorted statuary and macabre canvases. This place that you find yourself in is the Night Gallery.
Starring tonight, David McCallum, Leslie Nielsen, Fritz Weaver, Francis Lederer, David Carradine, Robert F. Lyons, Patty Duke, Carl Reiner, Virginia Mayo, John Carradine, David Wayne, and Cesar Romero, Bob Crane, Joanne Worley, Victor Buono, Forrest Tucker, and John Aston, Stuart Whitman, Harry Morgan, Kim Hunter, Norman Lloyd, and Sandra Locke, Harry Gardino, Richard Kiley, Julie Adams, Ray Danton, Bill Bixby, Carol Lindley, Steve Forrest, Donna Douglas, Cornell Wilde, Geraldine Page, Jack Alberson, Rosemary Forsyth, James Gregory, John Saxon, Lois Nettleton, Joel Gray, Royal Dano, Geraldine Page, Broderick Crawford, Barbara Steele, Richard Thomas, Cloris Leachman, Michael Dunn, and Lana Wood, Lawrence Harvey, William Wyndham, Joanna Pettit, Ed Nelson, and Edward G. Robinson, Zsa Zsa Gabor, Yaphet Kotto, Tony Roberts, Dana Andrews, Sandra Dee, Brock Peters, Patrick McNee, and Denise Nicollet, Elizabeth Hartman, Alex Cord, Bradford Dillman, Steve Lawrence, Louise Sorrell, Harvey Lembeck, and Barbara Rush, Ross Martin, Henry Darrow, Renee Aubergenois,
James Farentino, John Aston, and Mickey Rooney, Raymond Massey, Burl Ives, and Ross Martin, Burgess Meredith, Cameron Mitchell, and Barry Sullivan, Leonard Nimoy, Chuck Connors, Gary Lockwood, and Joan Van Ark, Leslie Warren, Lou Antonio, Brooke Bundy, and Robert Pratt, Dean Stockwell, Sally Field, Susan Strasberg, Alejandro Ray, and Barry Atwater, Steve Forrest, Dina Merrill,
and the voice of Orson Welles.
Rod Serling's Night Gallery was an anthology horror show that went from 1968 to 1972. It contained 3 seasons with over 100 stories. Now, for the purpose of this review, I'm strictly covering what was originally aired and produced as Night Gallery. Because when Night Gallery was syndicated, the networks were only looking to syndicate half-hour shows. However, Night Gallery was an hour-long anthology show, and many of the segments did not fit into a half-hour show. So, in order to make it fit syndication, Universal brought in a foreign national who had actually been cutting several episodes of their own TV shows into movies and selling them overseas. Universal decided not to prosecute, but instead brought him over to cut their old TV shows for syndication. And the problem with that was that Night Gallery either had segments that ended up being too long or too short. And so he would use all sorts of stock footage and other means to either cut them down or extend them in order to reach the episode limit for syndication. They included 26 episodes of Rod Serling's other paranormal anthology series, The Sixth Sense, and they had Rod Serling come in to shoot new openings for those episodes. But in this review, we're only going to be talking about the original Night Gallery episodes and stories. Night Gallery breaks down into about 6 categories. Category number 1 is really, really bad. Category 2 is bad, not terrible, but they have a few things that end up either breaking the story or it just wasn't good for other reasons that we'll get into. Category 3 is good or mostly just functional. Not great, but also not bad. Category 4 is pretty good to great. Category 5 is going to go over a couple episodes that are very good, but stick out from the series for how different they are. And Category 6 is comedy, which ranges from pretty good to not good at all. The stories that sit in Category 1 are Brenda and Clean Kills and Other Trophies. A consistent thing that you can see in almost all Night Gallery stories is that the characters are pretty good. However, the problem with both Brenda and Clean Kills is that both of them have one very one-dimensional character. Brenda, I feel, is worse off for this, being that the main character of Brenda is a rotten child, and at no point in the story does she ever seem to do anything to redeem herself. She does everything for selfish reasons, and is gleeful when putting others in harm's way. And the story ends by having a moment where we focus on her being sad, and it's clear, at least to me, that the show wants us to be sympathetic towards Brenda, when all I feel is antipathy for Brenda. She's not a good person, and frankly, she should have gotten her comeuppance for putting others in harm's way. Clean Kills and Other Trophies suffers seemingly the same problem, but to a different extent. See, in this story, it's not the main character who was a bad person, it's the main character's father. See, this is a story about an old British colonel that wants his son to prove himself a man so he can gain his inheritance. Now, the old British colonel doesn't like his son because his son is a hippie and a vegetarian and refuses to go hunting. It's very poorly defined, to the point you almost have to question why would they write it in such a way that the old man has no good personality traits or points. The story that does this really well is Deliveries in the Rear, which we'll go over later, but in that story there is a thing that the main character does that is a morally gray to morally bad thing to do, and he has a discussion with another character about this, where the other character calls it out for being morally bad. However, because the main character is fine with doing this thing, and believes it to be a morally neutral thing, their discussion is a really cool one to watch, because it sounds like two real people having a conversation. They are both believe that they are right, and they both give reasons to justify why they're right, even though we as the audience know that the main character is in the wrong. Clean Kills, on the other hand, tells us as the audience that the old man is wrong, and that none of his points are good, but I have a hard time believing why the old man would hold these points, if they're so blatantly wrong. And then, on top of having a character that's really poorly defined, Clean Kills also suffers from the twist at the end, when the house servant uses some old African magic to mount the old man's head to the wall, which brings in the issue of now the son, sure, he doesn't have to kill something, but he won't be able to claim the inheritance either. So the servant has messed everything up for both the son and the lawyer. So the story itself doesn't function, and the characters are flat. Now, examples of Category 2 include Eyes, Since Aunt Ida Came to Stay, The Diary, Whisper, Tell David, Class of 99, Keep in Touch, We'll Think of Something, Make Me Laugh, and The Little Black Bag. So let's start off talking about the ones that have minor things that end up ruining the story. For example, Eyes. Eyes is one of the first Night Gallery stories, being the second in the pilot. This story was directed by Steven Spielberg, and there's a lot to like about it, including the Doctor's character and performance. However, the plot relies on this old lady who is going to get an eye transplant so that she will be able to see for 12 hours, has gotten it in the middle of the night. But it's a New York blackout, and so she ends up not being able to see for most of the 11 hours. The problem with this is that New York, even in a blackout, you would be able to see a lot. And secondly, why would she do this in the middle of the night? Why not have it be that you would retain your eyesight near the beginning of the day or even the middle of the day if you wanted to see both day and night? And she had 11 hours to be able to see, and yet the story treats it as though the entire night took 11 hours. Another example of this is The Little Black Bag, which I think is a really interesting concept. A medical bag from the future is accidentally sent to the past and is picked up in an alleyway by a doctor who lost his medical license due to alcoholism. Now, the story has some really interesting beats where the doctor, after realizing the advanced medical procedures that he can do with the little black bag, decides that he's going to go sober and try and help as many people as he possibly can, and that he's going to give this technology to the current medical board to try and have them synthesize it. Now the issue comes in at the very end, where his homeless quote-unquote friend that he met just the other day decides that he is going to get rich by selling the bag to the medical board. And the reason why it all falls apart is because the original doctor had the plan to show it off by taking the scalpel in the bag that seals any wound it cuts and sticking it into his neck. But the other homeless man decides to take another scalpel from the bag and kill the doctor. This lets the people in the future know that the bag has been used for harm, so they deactivate all the tools. And then the homeless man ends up killing himself by stabbing it into his neck in front of the medical board. And after the future people know that the tool has been used to take a life, they disintegrate the bag. Now, this causes a problem in the plot as to why did the future people not just disintegrate the bag immediately. It's a simple problem that you could fix by simply just not having the future people be aware of it. Just introduce a mechanic that you have a tag on the bag that says the Hippocratic Oath, to do no harm. And then, we as the audience can imply that if the bag was used for harm, then all of the tools would stop working.
Joke. Shut your fucking mouth. Shut your fucking mouth.
Seriously though, that guy He stands there for over 30 seconds, just standing there with his mouth open, like he's trying to catch some flies or something. Really, just...
Shut your fucking mouth. Shut your fucking mouth.
Other issues with some of the episodes in this category include just simply poor writing. For example, Make Me Laugh, the other Steven Spielberg directed story, is about a comedian who makes a wish that everything he says from then on will make people laugh. And then he wants to become a dramatic actor, but he can't stop making people laugh. So he makes another wish to make people cry, and then he gets hit by a car. Now, in concept, this is fine. There's nothing super special about it. You could, with execution, make it a great story. But the problem is that in the beginning, he's not a funny comedian, and the things he says aren't funny, which makes sense. That's not a problem. He's supposed to be a bad comedian. However, when he starts to make everyone laugh after he makes the wish, nothing he says is funny either. It's just that people laugh at it.
What's done? What's done?
And I think that it really could have done well if the writing had allowed everything he said afterwards to either be a funny joke, a pun, or, anything else. But the problem is the writing doesn't allow for that. It's just whatever he says is now funny. And so, as an audience member, you feel a sort of disconnect, because he's supposed to be funny now, but he's still just as unfunny as he was before. Another example that shows a way the Night Gallery ends up trying to be distinctly different from the Twilight Zone is at the end of every episode of the Twilight Zone, Rod Serling would come out and give a message about what the moral of the story was, or certainly an end tag about the Twilight Zone.
The Chancellor, the late Chancellor, was only partly correct. He was obsolete. But so is the state, the entity he worshipped. Any state, any entity, any ideology that fails to recognize the worth, the dignity, the rights of man, that state is obsolete.
The Night Gallery doesn't have this, and for the most part it's not an issue, except in some cases, like the Class of 99, where it suffers because the Class of 99 is a really interesting story about a graduating class of seemingly college students who are tested by their professor. And they are put into situations where they have to belittle one another on the basis of their immutable traits.
White trash, ignorant, no graces, envious, money conscious, social climber.
Proceed. You may be seated.
And when one of them refuses to kill another student based on the color of their skin, they destroy that student, revealing that they are all robots. It ends with the two professors talking to each other about how it is a good thing that they are training and releasing racist robots onto the world.
We must recognize that many of the ancient virtues are simply weaknesses. For example, to tolerate an inferior is an act of misplaced compassion and, as such, interferes with our function as members of the society. We shall repay our debt to man by emulating him. We shall act as men, react as men. We shall be men.
And knowing Serling's other works, that's definitely not the message that he wanted to give out. And I certainly don't think that the story is trying to say that we should have more racism in society. But that's how it comes off. And so this definitely could have benefited from either having an end tag or just redrafting a lot. Now, I'd like to take a little break here to talk about some very interesting visuals of the Night Gallery. See, I found it fascinating listening to the behind-the-scenes commentaries, where many of the directors and cinematographers were reported as not enjoying their limits on the Night Gallery. That apparently Jack Laird and many of the other producers wanted them to strictly shoot in the, quote, Hollywood style. However, I find that really interesting because of the distinct examples that we have for really odd things and really difficult things to accomplish back then. Such as in Green Fingers, there's a small segment that is shot with someone hand carrying the camera. Now, back then with the large film cameras, this was really an accomplishment. They didn't have stabilizers or, small cameras. They were very heavy cameras and very expensive too. So the fact that they were able to get away with this was very surprising. Then you have very interesting visual effects such as in Antarctica Came to Stay or Camera Obscura. You also have a varying range of practical effects, some being quite good, such as the ones used in Pickman's model, others being okay to not so good, such as in Lindelman's Catch and The Fear of Spiders. Also, there was a really neat slow-motion shootout scene in The Tune in Dan's Cafe, as well as there are many examples of low budget having to affect them. Now, anyways, back on to Category 3. Marmalade Wine, The Funeral, There Aren't Any More McBains, Lindelman's Catch, The Last Laurel, The Miracle at Camafeo, The Girl with the Hungry Eyes, The Sins of the Fathers, The Dead Man, Cool Air, You Can't Get Help Like That Anymore, House with Ghost, A Fear of Spiders, Camera Obscura, Return of the Sorcerer, The Painted Mirror, The Waiting Room, Green Fingers, The Dark Boy, The Dark Boy, The Different Ones, The Hand of Burgess Weems, Lagoda's Heads, Dr. Stringfellow's Rejuvenator, and The Doll of Death, to name quite a few. Now, this category, like I said earlier, has many episodes. In fact, the bulk of Night Gallery actually sits here. Now, everything works. They're all functional, but nothing really stands out as above average. A prime example of this is The Miracle at Camafeo, where a man has conned an insurance company by tricking them into believing that he was paralyzed by being hit by their bus. He and his wife have now traveled to the small Mexican town of Camafeo, where people from all over come for miracles. On their way up, an insurance lawyer that is with them helps a little blind boy get up the hill, and then the little blind boy, while praying, is cured of his blindness. And the man who is pretending to be paralyzed walks out of the shed, and then the sun hits him, and he is now blind. It's a really simple story about how you shouldn't lie. Mechanically, everything works fine, but there's just nothing that really makes it that great. Another example could be The Different Ones, being that a man here on Earth in the future is born with a severe deformity, and when given the options to either put him down or send him to another planet, his father decides that he will send him to the other planet. And when the man gets there, he meets the aliens, and they all have the same deformity that he does, and he decides that he will probably be happy on this planet. Again, another really simple story that doesn't have much profound to say, but all works all the same. Many of the ones from this category have quite interesting special effects, to say the least. By the way, that is Mark Hamill in one of his first roles at age 21.
That's my door. Oh, I got a telegram here for Ellie Green. Mm-hmm. Is that your wife? No, that's me. What's your name? Francis. So what are you looking at? See you, Francis.
Some of which include The Painted Mirror, A Fear of Spiders, and Cool Air. Now, Category 4 is really neat. This is what I would say you should watch the Night Gallery for. The examples of Category 4 stories include The Cemetery, Midnight Never Ends, Pickman's Model, The Tune and Dan's Cafe, The Other Way Out, The Escape Route, Finnegan's Flight, The Doll, The Caterpillar, A Feast of Blood, Deliveries in the Rear, The Ring with the Red Velvet Ropes, The Messiah on Mott Street, Little Girl Lost, Death on a Barge, The Phantom Farmhouse, Hell's Bells, A Question of Fear, Rare Objects, Death in the Family, The Devil is Not Mocked, and Dead Weight. Now, my personal favorite from this category is Midnight Never Ends, so we'll get to that one last. One story that I almost didn't include into this category would be The Escape Route. Now, this story is the third story in the pilot of Night Gallery, and this is a story about a former SS officer who determined which line people went into when they entered Auschwitz. And he escaped down in South America, and the story is about him trying to escape his past by wishing to be a mountain fisherman. He spends his days staring at a painting in a museum. The story is pretty good. I like it a lot, but the only caveat I have is midway through the story, the main character gets drunk and starts reminiscing by singing German songs. And then he runs into a survivor of the Holocaust who recognizes him. And instead of being in character, the main character decides to kill the old Jewish man on the spot. And I do think that it's out of character for him to do that. He has nightmares about the time that he spent in World War II, and he seemingly wants to give everything up just to be a fisherman. The only reason why I think they have him kill the old Jewish man is so that the audience is okay with him getting condemned as the end result. However, I think that most people, like 99% of people, would be perfectly alright with him being condemned after we learn that he was the guy who determined who went in which line at Auschwitz. And I don't think that he would kill the old Jewish guy. I think that it would be much more in character for him to tell the old Jewish man something along the lines of, "No, get out of here. I'm not like that anymore." You know, something along those lines. But it's not so out of character that it breaks the story, so that's why I decided to include it into this category. This category includes many good stories with really interesting premises that, had it not been for budget restrictions, I think they could do really well, such as The Devil is Not Mocked, which is a story about Nazis versus vampires. Or both Dead Man and Finnegan's Flight have similar premises of a human being that is able to physically alter themselves through thought. They're both really interesting, but Finnegan's Flight is definitely better. Or The Ring with the Red Velvet Ropes, which is about the world champion boxer finding out that there is an immortal boxer who is the real world champion, and he's challenged to fight him in the ring. Night Gallery, as a series, was one of the first instances of live-action adaptations of H.P. Lovecraft's work, Pickman's Model, Cool Air, and Professor Peabody's Last Lecture. Now, how true they are to those original stories, I'm not sure. But Pickman's Model is definitely the best out of the three. The Leonard Nimoy directed Death on a Barge is about the only time in Night Gallery that a vampire is taken seriously. Even in The Devil Is Not Mocked, there is a clear comedic tone to the vampire, even though it's an overall serious story.
This, we tell you up front, is a story of vampires. And, of course, this must conjure up images of Bela Lugosi and Christopher Lee.
I'd just like to note that that is a Christopher Lee reference from when Dracula was the biggest role Christopher Lee had played. Interesting to think how far we've come. Night Gallery, as a series, seems to have something for everyone. Because even if you were looking for a Christmas story, well, you would find it in The Messiah on Mott Street, which is a really heartfelt tale of a little boy trying to save his grandpa. It's well written, and yeah, it's really odd that it's in here, but if you're looking for a relatively short, good Christmas story, well, here you go.
He's the messenger from God. At any minute he will appear, looming big and black against the sky, striking down our enemies.
Mr. Messiah, I've sure been looking for you.
Look, what makes you think I'm the Messiah?
Because you're big and black and you loom. Come on, Mr. Messiah. I'll show you where we live.
Now, one of the most renowned episodes of Night Gallery is The Caterpillar. I really like The Caterpillar. I think it does a lot very well. The only qualm that I would take with The Caterpillar is that I don't think at the end they truly portray how morally dubious what the woman and her husband do. Because the story of The Caterpillar is pretty simple. You have a British man who has moved in with this British colonel, and the old British colonel has a very young wife. She's beautiful, and it drives the younger man, Mr. Macy, insane. Mr. Macy meets a British criminal who was sent there instead of being sent to hang. And the criminal gets the native people to place a caterpillar that will eat its way through a person's brain and cannot go backwards into the old man's ear. But, mistakenly, they put it in the wrong room and it ends up going through Mr. Macy. After 2 or 3 weeks of insufferable torment, Mr. Macy comes out. The caterpillar had come out the other side, and they killed it. He expects to simply be let off the hook so that the old man can avoid controversy, and then he is told that the caterpillar that entered his brain was a female, and that it laid eggs, and they would hatch relatively soon and eat their way through him. And while sure, he did try to kill the old man, and so he should get some comeuppance for that. I don't think the story recognizes just how evil it is to let Mr. Macy suffer those 2 to 3 weeks of torment and let the caterpillar eggs hatch inside his brain. But other than that, it's a pretty good story. Now, the counterpart to The Caterpillar is Little Girl Lost, which is a pretty good story that I don't think most people have seen. Even though most people haven't seen Night Gallery, it seems to go under the radar most of the time, but if people did see the original airing of Night Gallery, then they still haven't seen the completed Little Girl Lost, because the story of Little Girl Lost got 5 minutes cut because of the fact that they were not willing to cut a single frame from the caterpillar, as well as it ended up costing Universal quite a bit of money. See, when the episode came out, the actor in Little Girl Lost was running for San Diego City Council, and one of his opponents tried, and successfully, ended up suing Universal, claiming that it was a 16-minute long campaign ad for his opponent, and that he deserved equal time. Now, Universal wasn't going to cast the opponent in some random TV show for 16 minutes, so they ended up having to pay him. But with the extra 5 minutes, it really helps to contextualize the story. The story is a scientist ended up losing his wife and daughter in a car crash, but has formed the delusion that his daughter is still alive. And so, in order to get him to keep working for the government on their nuclear programs, they need to bring in someone to help make sure he still exists within his delusion. They feared that if he actually believed that his daughter was dead, he wouldn't continue his work, and ultimately, he ends up realizing that his daughter was dead, and he gives them the formulas, and they end up unleashing a nuclear reaction that destroys the world. Now, without the additional 5 minutes, the story has a lot less to say, and would probably fall into Category 3. But, with the additional 5 minutes, it actually has a lot to say about the incompetence of human beings. Being that the scientist has sort of an antipathy for human beings, because we accept faults as normal, instead of something to be fixed. Now, whether he's right or wrong doesn't really matter. These 5 minutes help flesh out his motivations for doing what he does, and with these 5 minutes, you end up understanding why he would blow up the world. Night Gallery does a really good job as far as character writing goes. One of the best examples comes from the story Deliveries in the Rear. Now, this is a tale of a professor trying to train other students to be surgeons, and he believes that being a surgeon is very, very important in order to save people's lives, and therefore, he only wants to demonstrate on human corpses. However, in his quest to get human corpses, he needs them to be fresh, so he decides not to ask questions about where the corpses come from. And this leads a woman to believe that the people who bring him the corpses have murdered her husband. He covers it up by claiming that the only body they have is that of a woman, and pays the corpseman to bring him a body of a woman to demonstrate on, and they end up killing his fiancée. Now, in this story, there's a conversation between our main character and his fiancée's father. In it, our main character believes that he is completely justified in simply not asking questions, because even if, hypothetically, it was costing lives to get the bodies, all the surgeons he would train would end up saving more lives. But the fiancé's father believes the exact opposite, and believes that he has a moral obligation to make sure that the corpses that come in were happily donated rather than found by possible murderers. And even though we as the audience are able to agree with the fiancé's father, it's really nice to have our main character argue from a position that he is right. It makes him feel like a real person. One of my favorite scenes in Night Gallery comes from the story Hell's Bells, which is a mostly comedic story about a hippie who gets sent to hell. But hell isn't exactly what you would imagine it to be. It's not all fires and brimstone. For this hippie, it's a boring family room with bad music and a family showing him all 8,000 photos from their vacation. The hippie gets really frustrated and finally asks to see the devil. The devil shows up and gives him this line, which I really like and I find to be one of the funniest in the Night Gallery and possibly one of the most insightful.
They asked. You know, it's a curious thing, but they have exactly the same room up there. Yes, you see, while this room is hell for you, absolute beastly hell, up there, the identical room is someone else's idea of heaven. Think about that. Bye.
Now, let's talk about Midnight Never Ends. I was very surprised to find out on the behind the scenes that a lot of people who worked on Midnight Never Ends were not too proud of it, mainly due to budget restrictions and poor sets, which I really think helped the story in the end. Midnight Never Ends is a pretty simple story about two characters going through a story, and while they're going through the story, they point out plot holes along the way, until finally they realize that they are all characters in a story, and it's just a rough draft that the author throws out. Even though some of the people who worked on it felt ashamed of the low production value, I think it works a lot for this story, because other than a few set pieces, you can tell that it's all entirely on a black soundstage. And I think this works well, considering that the story is all about how undefined everything is, and about how the writer can't seem to figure out where he wants his story to go. The only thing that I would say as a possible caveat for this is I think it was a missed opportunity to not have Rod Serling play the writer at the end. Before we go on to Category 5, I'd like to take another slight break and talk about something that I find very interesting with Night Gallery. Now, Night Gallery could easily be compared to the Twilight Zone, Rod Serling's other more notable anthology series. I would say that if you can watch the Twilight Zone, then you should be fine to watch Night Gallery. Night Gallery, though, definitely has a lot darker bits and pieces than the Twilight Zone ever did. For instance, in You Can't Get Help Like That Anymore, a character says the word slut, which, while not ever against any rules to be on TV, I was shocked to find it in an instance of TV this early.
Is it possible that they programmed a little slut into you?
Oh, no, ma'am.
As well as there are many instances throughout the series showing quite a bit of blood, which was something that it was hard for them to get away with back then. In The Girl with the Hungry Eyes, which is a story all about a female demon who seduces men and kills them, there are some very risque images.
Okay.
One of the darkest stories that Night Gallery has is The Other Way Out, which is a story about a politician who ended up killing a prostitute and then is lured back to her family home and is trapped by the rest of her family and given another way out.
You said there was another way out? There is no other way out, is there? You lied to me!
No, I didn't. Here, Mr. Meredith. Here's the other way out.
Now, Category 5 is very similar in tone to a lot of the darker episodes. There are only two examples, that being They're Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar and Silent Snow, Secret Snow. Now, the reason why both of these stories have to be in their own separate category is not because they're bad.
I think that they're both really good. However, when the series focuses on making vampires a joke every other week, or stories of werewolves, zombies, ghosts, and ghouls, having these stories in there, they stick out like a sore thumb, because Silent Snow, Secret Snow is a story that is very artistically executed, where it's all about this little boy who is hallucinating snow everywhere that he goes, but no one else can see it. And so, in the end, he ends up going insane. And the whole story is a very long, well-written poem that's read out by Orson Welles, all about this little boy losing his mind.
The white ragged lines drifting and sifting, whispering and hushing, seething and getting deeper and deeper, silenter and silenter.
The story, They're Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar, is all about a man who has worked for 25 years for this company and feels like he's not gone anywhere. His wife has left him, and most of his friends have either moved or have died. He feels unrecognized, especially when there's a new guy in the office that is much younger than he is and can seemingly do everything that he can, but faster and more efficiently. He tries to take some solace by going down to Tim Riley's bar, and he finds that it's being closed. Throughout the story, he keeps going back to it, and he keeps having flashbacks from when he got back from World War II, and everyone was there having a good time, only to be brought out of it by one of his only remaining friends from the era, a friendly police officer. Until finally, he realizes that there is no going back, and that he has to move on with his life. He takes one last look at Tim Riley's bar, and then goes into another little restaurant, where his co-workers and his boss are there to surprise him and thank him for 25 years that he spent at the company. And while they're all celebrating, we see Tim Riley's bar finally get taken down. Now, when I went into this series, and especially after seeing all the episodes about ghosts and vampires, I was definitely not expecting an existential horror about getting older. Not that it's a bad story, I actually think that it's really good, and I would encourage people to check it out, but just know going into watching all of Night Gallery that these two stories will definitely stick out for just how different they are. Now, category 6, our final category, is comedy. Now, Night Gallery, when conceived of by Rod Serling, was not meant to be a comedic series. However, Jack Laird, the main producer of the show, wanted it to be comedic, and while Rod Serling had made sure in his contract to be a script supervisor, he had not made sure to be given creative control over the series. And so, due to this, Jack was able to put in a lot of the comedic sketches that he wanted, as well as making some other sketches appear more comedic than intended. The comedy in Night Gallery ranges from quite well done in stories like Hell's Bells and The Late Mr. Peddington to absolutely cringeworthy in Witch's Feast. But most of the comedy in Night Gallery ends up falling flat. However, I do want to say that two of these comedic scenes were definitely carried by their actors, that being A Matter of Semantics and Phantom of What Opera. Cesar Romero definitely does a good job at playing completely into character and devouring the scenery around him as Count Dracula. Then, in Phantom of What Opera, Leslie Nielsen apparently had a really hard time on set, being that his face was coated in makeup and he had to wear a mask over it. And then,
when he had to carry a woman down a set of stone steps without any railing, when asked if there was any way that he could not breathe so heavily when delivering his lines when he got down the stairs, he told them, quote, "You try carrying a broad down the stairs." Then, later in the scene, when he goes to put out his match, he first tried blowing it out, but due to the paper mask in front of his mouth, he couldn't actually blow it out. So then they cut, and he tried to do it again, but this time he tried to put it out with his fingers, and the flame was too big, so he ended up burning his fingers. So then he tried it again and tried to simply just wave it out, and it still wouldn't go out, so finally he just threw it on the ground and stomped it out. And because that was more funny than anything they had actually written for the skit, they ended up keeping all 3 attempts to put out the fire. The last thing that I would like to talk about with Night Gallery is the music of Night Gallery. Now, Night Gallery was one of the first major productions to have a synthetic score. At the time, synthetic music wasn't looked very highly on. I really like some of it. Some of the music from the pilot especially, I quite like. They also end up reusing much of the music in Night Gallery, such as the party theme, which is mainly used in Ms. Lovecraft Sent Me, but if you listen carefully, you can hear it reappear in The Diary, and You Can't Get Help Like That Anymore.
Miss Lovecraft sent me. I'm from the agency. I'm your babysitter, Betsy.
Hi.
Then, you also have the fight music, or dramatic tension music, which the funniest instant I find is in The Ghost of Sorthworth's Place, where an American man is trying to fight off the zombified corpse of this woman's late husband, and because they obviously didn't want their actors to get hurt, they didn't choreograph a fight very well. So they both sort of just put their hands on each other's shoulders and walk back and forth. But the music, because it was made to be a track that would ramp up the tension, is very powerful in this moment and ends up not fitting very well. In the end, Night Gallery is a very interesting series with a very varied quality and many instances of good writing and bad writing. And I would very much encourage anyone who is interested to check out the entire series. I got this box set off of Amazon for around $20. It's a really good box set with a bunch of special features, and all the episodes restored to the highest capacity that they could have been by the Night Gallery historians Scott Skelton and Jim Benson. The only caveat that I would add is that if you're going through the series, Season 1, Disc 3 includes 3 bonus episodes that are just episodes from later in the series, so I would encourage that you skip those. When you get to Season 2, Episode 22, after the caterpillar finishes, I would encourage you to put in Season 3, Disc 2, and find in the Lost Tales from Season 2, Little Girl Lost. That is the completed version with the additional 5 minutes. Now, I'm not going to give Night Gallery a rating. If I were, it would be very difficult because of just how varied the series is. You would almost have to take it on a story-by-story basis. But seeing as it all comes as one package, it would be very difficult to do that. And I don't really think that it's worth it to do that. I would just simply encourage people to check it out. It's not the greatest series in the world, but it's also definitely better than a lot of shows. And it's really fun to check out and see a lot of interesting storytelling and effects that they did back in the day. So, if you like this video, I would encourage you to actually like the video and possibly subscribe. I'm not sure if I'm going to be continuing these long-form reviews, but if I do, you'll see them here. If I end up doing more short-term reviews, then you'll also see those here, though I don't know if I have much interest in doing that. As well as I will be making a meme or two, and they will be here. So stick around, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Bye-bye.
Good evening.